Delighted to be here. And isn't it a bully day? I am Theodore Roosevelt. Some of you have heard of me. I was the 26th President of the United States. Some people said, in my own party, I was the unfortunate president. My own party boss said, "Oh my God, that cowboy is president now, what will we do?" The Democrats took revel in it because they said that rebel of the Republicans is now in charge of this country. What are we to do? Because I came to the presidency through the courtesy or discourtesy of an assassin's bullet. Mr. McKinley, President McKinley, was my senior, and I was vice president under him. And in September of 1901, an assassin's bullet at the Pan American Exposition took his life from this country. And I took the oath of office, and I became the most powerful man in the world. And I reveled in it. I did not want to be vice president. I wanted to be president, but not until 1904. 1901 rushed it a bit. But I don't want to get into politics just at the moment, because tonight here we are to discuss, and I've been asked to discuss my heroes in my life. And there are a great many. Some minor, some major, some that affected my life, some that affected your life even to today. But I have to tell you a little bit about my background and why these heroes became so important to me. I was born in 1858, a time of terrible conflict in this country. The Kansas-Nebraska Act that eventually created Colorado was being debated in Congress, and the South was ready to secede from the Union. And a great civil war was on the uprising. And I was born into this conflict. But I was born into a family that was blended North and South. My father was a hard-headed New Yorker, businessman, and my family had been in New York since the Mayflower. My mother was a Southern belle from Georgia. She was brought up in antebellum South. She was the belle of the ball, and she espoused the Southern cause. And those were my parents in my day, so I had the best of both worlds and the worst of both worlds in that war. My mother extracted a promise from my father that he would not bear arms against the South because my grandfather was a colonel in the Georgia militia, my Uncle Jimmy was a captain in the Confederate Navy, and I had cousins and other relatives fighting in the cause. And so he swore an oath that he would never carry a rifle and never bear arms, and he paid $300 to a conscript to take his place. That was an honorable thing to do in those days. If you could not fight in the war, you provided for another to take your place. But my father, who perhaps is my greatest hero ever in my life, fought in his own way. And my mother, who is also a hero in my life, fought in her way too. My father decided he would do something for the cause in politics in Washington. He didn't run for office, but he took the power of the Roosevelt name and the money that we had acquired in New York in pottery, in land development, in banking, and in glassworks, and he took that down to Washington to lobby before lobbyists were even allowed, to make the case for soldiers and sailors that were injured in the battle. Through his efforts and through Congress and through his meeting with Abraham Lincoln, they came up with the allotment system that allowed soldiers to send money home instead of wasting it on Cox's army after each battle. That allowed the families to survive during the war. He lobbied for better hospitals and better treatment of the wounded because the wounded were patched up and sent on their way, discharged from the army with no stipend. He lobbied for better prison conditions from the North because he felt that we had the Christian position in that battle and we had to treat those soldiers and sailors with dignity. And he fought long and hard to eliminate prisons like Andersonville in the South. My father met Abraham Lincoln, a name even my mother revered for his strength, his courage, and his intellect. My mother fought in her own way. While my father was in Washington, she would put together contraband boxes, nothing of munitions, but medical care, medical devices, bandages, clothing, and food items that she could run to a blockade runner up in Long Island, the Confederate blockade runner that would pick them up and take them to the South. We were the only house in New York City that could fly both the Stars and Stripes and the Stars and Bars at the same time. I learned about the conflict from both sides in that war. And I contend, ladies and gentlemen, that that was the final battle of the constitutional war of this United States. Our founding fathers left one glaring error in the bright spot in the world, and that was how to deal with slavery. My mother had a slave that she brought north with her, and once she was married to my father, she gave her freedom and her papers, but she remained loyal to my mother to the day she died. My mother, on the other hand, was also very intelligent. She was schooled, which was unusual for an antebellum belle of the ball. She had knowledge in art, music, literature, and she taught me the finer things of life, how to appreciate a good sonata, how to look at a portrait or a picture and determine whether it was good or bad, how to read Shakespeare and how to read Homer. The Iliad, the Odyssey were read in my home to my brothers and my sisters, and I had that finer side of life. My father, who is my primary hero in life, and I followed in his footsteps as best I could, he taught me how to give a square deal to those people that you were dealing with. A good negotiation makes both sides come out a winner. He taught me mathematics and science and nature, and he taught me how to appreciate those events. So I had both the fine arts and the sciences to deal with when I was home. You see, I could not be schooled in a regular school. I was asthmatic. I was intractable asthmatic. I was close to death many times before I was 5. Some of my earliest memories of my father was racing breakneck speed through Central Park in a one-horse carriage with my mother bracing me in the front and my father whipping the horse to get speed up so that it could force air into my lungs so that I could breathe. They wanted me that much, but I was homeschooled with them. And my brothers went off to school. My brother Elliot went off to school. My sisters Anna and Corinne would come back and tell me stories of the schoolhouse. We had friends around, but I could not play outside much because I found out later that I had an allergy to coal dust and coal smoke. And it tripped my asthma out and made me worse. Vacation time, we go to Oyster Bay because, if you haven't heard already, there are 2 branches of the Roosevelt family. There's the Hyde Park Roosevelts, which my 5th cousin, Franklin, belongs to, and there was the Oyster Bay Roosevelts, which I am my sire from. And the Oyster Bay is far more cultured and far more better off than the Hyde Park ones, even though the money difference was the same. Because we had the ocean, we didn't have a river. But we would go to vacation there and in Virginia to a hunting lodge that we had, and I would regain my health because the air was pure, especially in Oyster Bay. It was humidified by the natural sea breezes, and it was clear and clean, and I could breathe, and I could walk into the woods that I dearly loved. I began at 7 years old, curious about the flora and fauna that I saw and the animals that lived there, and I made my first hunt of a ground squirrel. I killed him with my slingshot in a rock. I was so anxious to see how that squirrel reacted and how it was put together that I did a crude dissection and found out that there was a lot to that animal. I skinned him, and I decided that I had seen all the treasures in the museums of stuffed animals, so I did a taxidermy on him, and I roughly applied salt to this hide, and I stitched him together as best I could. I came back from the shed all proud, and I presented that to my mother, and she screamed loudly. She picked it up by the tail delicately and threw it in the trash. And she said, "Wait till your father comes home." Well, my father came home, and she picked it up again and said, "Look what your son Theodore is doing." Well, my father, who was interested in natural science as he said, "I will deal with Theodore." And we took me into the office, his office up at Oyster Bay, and he said, "Are you intent on doing this more?" And I said, "Yes, Father, I would really like to. I have read all about the buffalo hunts and the dime novels because that was the treat. After I would read Homer for a period of hours, I was allowed to read the dime novels about the West. And I said, I intend to be a hunter. I intend to be a big game hunter when I grow up. And he said, you're intent on doing taxidermy like this? And I said, well, that's what I can do. He said, I will hire the taxidermist that we have at the Museum of Natural History in New York. And you will learn proper taxidermy. If you're going to bring these treasures home to your mother, you have to do it properly. You have to do everything properly. That's what he taught me. You have to be correct, you have to be proper, and you have to always be considerate of the other person. Well, we went on, and I made more hunts, and we would go back to New York City, and I would still be asthmatic. And as I approached time to go to college, I was about 14. And I was still anxious because at 17, I was going off to Harvard. I was a legacy student. My father had gone on to Harvard, and I was a legacy student. And I was nervous about going on because I still could not run and play outside. I couldn't spend much time out of doors because of my asthma. And I sat with my father one day and I said, Father, what can I do? I want to make my life better. I want to make my body better. How can I do this? And he sat me down and he gave me the best advice that any friend, any parent, any hero could give you. And that is, Theodore, you have a great mind that will take you far in life, but your body won't cross the threshold to get there. But the secret to a long and happy life is one thing and one thing only. You have the responsibility to make it what it will be. You have that responsibility to make up your mind, and once you make up your mind to improve yourself, make it your entire life's work and being and cause, and you will live a long and happy life. People can help you. People can hinder you, but do not allow them to make your mind up and make a decision for you, because you're responsible. No one else is. I said, well, Father, I want to improve my life. How can I do that? Then he said, well, we can set about building your body. I have heard that by building your body and building your muscles that your body works better and you will feel better. So we set up outside of Elliot's in my bedroom on the second floor, a gymnasium. I worked out every day. I had a rowing machine on the floor, weighed about 600 pounds, springs as big around as my forearm. I had dumbbells, I had medicine ball, we passed those around, I had a jumping rope. I still was not allowed, I could not run very far, but I got out and walked where I could and came back. And by the time I was 16, I still was not ready, I was still suffering. And he said, well, we need to get us some professional help. And he hired a bare-knuckles boxer, the finest athletes of their time. They had to come into the ring and toe the mark for 15 rounds and to get paid. And they were the finest trained, they were the finest athletes, and he hired a champion to come in and train me. We put in a punching bag, we put in a body bag, we skipped rope, I rode more, I walked more, I started running, I punched, and I walked my way through development of my chest muscles to the point where I could force myself to breathe. And that's the way I succeeded in life. I still had the asthma all the rest of my life, but I had to stop occasionally and use my muscles to clear my lungs. I was also put on a regimen of strong coffee and eucalyptus smell throughout the house. Eucalyptus cleared up the nasal passages and the bronchial tubes, and the coffee was noted as a bronchial dilator. I became rather addicted to coffee. I kind of like coffee. But that's the way my house was, and my father set me on the right path, and he is my all-time hero. There are others I've met in my life. I went on to college, and I went out into the world. I married my first wife, Alice, over the objections of her brother. He took me home to dinner one night, and I discovered Alice across the room, a fine young blonde lady, 5'2", a figure that could stop traffic, and an intellect and a humor that was second to none. I asked him who that creature was, and he said, that's my sister. Why? And I said, I intend to marry her. And he said, well, good luck. And I said, no, you don't understand. I have made up my mind to marry that woman, and I will. And he said, well, stand in line. Every man jack in Boston wants her. She's beautiful, she's intelligent, and she has her own money from a grandparent. So stand in line, you little runt. I was only 5'8". But I didn't stand in line. I made a plan, and that plan included making her father my friend, making her mother my friend, ingratiating myself to that table at all aspects and every family meal. And finally, Valentine's Day of 1888, I said, Alice, have you ever entertained the idea of marrying me? And she said, well, Theodore, I didn't think I had a choice. You've worn me down. We were married that fall, and we went to live in New York City. And I went on about my business, writing my books, and I got involved with politics. In 1884, Alice was a hero of mine because she put up with me. I traveled around hunting because I did become a huntsman, and I enjoyed the West. I enjoyed the solace of the woods, but I always came home to her because I loved her dearly. In 1884, we were expecting our first child, and she was not doing well. And my mother contracted typhus. My mother was a strong woman, my second most powerful hero in my life. And after Christmas, they were both bedridden, for Alice with complications of pregnancy and my mother from complications of typhus. Alice was born February 12th. And I prepared and I left for Albany because the doctor said everything would be fine. I received an urgent telegram to come home, and I came home, and on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, my mother expired in the morning from complications of typhus, and my wife died of Bright's disease, a liver ailment that was concealed by the pregnancy. I was bereft of any consciousness at that moment. I was so depressed I could not go back to work. I tried and I tried. After my father died, I went headlong into activity, and I made it my point that's the way I grieve for him. I had no idea how to grieve for my wife or my mother. So I went out to the west. I had purchased a 10,000-acre ranch, the Elkhorn, on the little bend of the Missouri River by a town called Medora. And I went out there instinctively knowing that the West would heal me. When I got there, I was not your usual cowboy. I met my heroes that are cowboys, the entire lot of them. But as I rode in there thinking that I was going to be a cowboy, I made quite a sight. Because here I am in glasses. I have on alligator skin boots. I have on riding breeches because, after all, I was going to be riding a horse, and they puffed out at the sides. I had on a shirt because I read in those dime novels that everyone wore a fringe shirt, and they had beading on the shirt. So I had a shirt with a placard in the front, fringe all around it, fringe underneath the sleeves. I had roses going up the arms. I had roses all over the front, all stitched in the finest style from New York's finest tailor. I had a silver-plated .45 Colt that I had done at Cartier. I had my holster made at the same place. And I had a hat that behooved that of a riverboat gambler. I had gauntlets that came up to the sleeve, a fringe underneath, and roses on the obverse palms. I stood there in my cowboy glory looking at them, and they died laughing on the ground. After that, at every campfire, I rode with them. I went out on every trail drive, 18, 20 hours a day, sometimes not even getting sleep for 48. I did everything they did. I ate the food they did. I drank the coffee they made, and I did everything that they did for 2 years. But every night around the campfire, they would ride me with derogatory names that began with Four Eyes, began with dude, and went to the profane, which I did not care for. But I took it because I was in such misery. But the cowboys were treating me the way I needed to be treated. I needed to be honed. I needed to be brought into the flames and come out like the phoenix, rising from the ashes of my depression. After 2 years, they were let up because I had done everything I had needed to do. I followed the cowboy code with them, and they started to let up on me. And one night, we went to a saloon outside of Medora. I didn't drink, and I don't drink. But they took me anyway, and I hated more than anything the profanity. And they had learned to deal with that, and had limited the amount of profanity that they used around the campfire. But we went into this saloon, and there were some soiled doves there, ladies of the evening. Now, I don't know what you think of them, and I don't care. I was brought up by my mother and father to treat all women with respect, no matter what they did, how they looked, or what they were about. And there were some soiled doves there, and my men were genteel with them. But there was another group of cowboys from a different ranch. And one rather large person was turning the air blue with epithets. He was cursing up a storm and did not care who he aimed it at. I was burning mad, and my temper had come up. And I walked over to him in my 5'8" glory, and I looked up at him, and I said, "Shut up!" As I saw his fist start to clench and his arms start to rise, I took the initiative and I pounced upon him, knocked him down, and beat him severely around the head and shoulders. My cowboy friends had to pull me off. I was so enraged with that man. Everything that I had suffered for 2 years or more came out in my fist with that young man. And the cowboys knew that I had worked out my frustration. From that night on, I became close friends with them. I have a lifelong friends out of that relationship. And those cowboys brought me to the realization that I could do anything I set my mind to. They also took me to Devil's Tower. They took me to the Tetons. They took me to the grasslands. They showed me where the herds of buffalo had been, but had been wiped out. They taught me how to love the land and take care of it. They taught me how this nation can grow if we mind the store, if we take care of what we have, because that's what they do. They move the cattle around so they don't overgraze. They take care of each and every steer, each and every calf. They have the same respect for them as they do anyone else. And once you gain their respect and love, you will have it forever. Cowboys may not sound like a heroic effort, but they populated the land. They caused this land to grow. By providing a protein food source that could be delivered easily and could be grown off of the native grasses that we have and protect that land that they were stewards of. Cowboys are a hero to me, and they always have been, and they always will be. And they will play a particular point in my life later on. But after the incident at the bar at Medora, I was sitting at breakfast one morning in a cafe because I preferred not to cook my own meal. And I was reading a 2-month-old newspaper from New York City. And there was an article on page 3 down in the corner. It says Theodore Roosevelt was running for mayor. And I thought that was a great thing to do. I did not know about it. But if they were going to run me for mayor, it was time for me to get back involved in the East Coast, back in where my family had power. And I thought I would go. And I went back, and in 1886, I ran for mayor of New York. Spirited campaign. The Republicans were against me, the Democrats were against me, and for the most part, I was against me. Because I was a brash young man, I still did not understand the power of the spoken word. I didn't understand the power that you had to wield and the confidence you had to gain from those people, even though I'd learned much from the cowboys. I lost bitterly in that campaign. But while campaigning, I made the reacquaintance of a childhood friend, Edith Carroll. And we struck up the relationship that we had before I went to Harvard. And in the fall of 1886, we decided to marry, and we went off to Europe on a grand tour of Europe, and the ship captain on board the boat married us. And it was a wonderful relationship. Edith had common sense where I did not. Edith had financial backing and budgeting, which I did not. She had all the aspects of my life that I lacked, and she was the counterbalance to what I had. Alice was my passion of youth. I would not forsake that, but I never talked of her again in my life. Edith Carroll Roosevelt was my match for life. She provided the stability that allowed me to calm down and run for office and make it viable. She was my hero. She gave me 5 children. In the White House, a reporter once asked her, "What do you do with the children?" And she said, "The 6 of them." And the reporter said, "Well, you only have 5. And she said, "No, with Theodore, it's 6. And she was right. I wanted to be a child. That's my problem. I wanted to be a child. The childhood that I didn't have because I was asthmatic, I wanted to be a child the rest of my life. And at every opportunity, I took the opportunity to become a boy again. But Edith understood that, and she stuck with me. I went to work for the government. I provided great services to the Office of Civil Service under 2 administrations, one Republican, Harrison, and one Cleveland. Cleveland was too embarrassed to fire me because I was doing such good work. Came about the election of 1896. And I supported Mr. McKinley, and I campaigned for him. And with that campaigning and that support, I was appointed to the Undersecretary of the Navy. Now, Mr. McKinley was a fine man, and I liked him, but I would not consider him a hero. He was in the pocket of big business. He was being used by Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and Carnegie. They had bought and paid for his election. And while I realized that, I knew that he could do good works. Well, I went to the Navy Department, and Secretary Long was a noted hypochondriac, so at every moment I asked Secretary Long if he was feeling all right. And perhaps he may want to sit down and have a glass of water. Or maybe he should lie down for a while and get his rest back, and he would go away for weeks at a time, allowing me to run the Navy Department. The Spanish War came about, and I petitioned Mr. McKinley to leave my office and join the military, to join the Army. I wanted to become a soldier. I wanted to become a child. I wanted to become a youth and go fight in a desperate battle for freedom. And at first, Mr. McKinley said no. And then he had to acquiesce because I told him I would resign and enlist anyway. The Army had just made 3 volunteer regiments, and he put me with another officer, another hero of mine, Leonard Wood, Colonel Leonard Wood. And he was the leader of the 1st Volunteer Cavalry, and I was the executive officer. We put out a hue and cry for volunteers to come nationwide, to come to the service of their country. I expected to fill 996 seats within about 2 weeks. The first day, we had 2,500 applicants. And every day after that, for the next 2 weeks, we had 1,000 to 1,500 applying for that 996 jobs. My cowboys from the West, the ones that knew me, the ones that didn't know me, but knew me by reputation, came to the call of Theodore Roosevelt. And they responded to the call of their country to me. We had the pick of the crop. 70% of that 900 were cowboys that responded to the call of their country. 30% were dandies from New England and around the country that could ride a horse but had never calculated how to shoot a gun from horseback. But they wanted an adventure, and they knew that I would give it to them. We trained in Waco, and the Rough Riders, as they were called, are another group of my heroes. And in particular one, Bucky O'Neill. Bucky was a captain of G Troop, became a lifelong friend. He came out from Arizona with 100 men with him and formed G Troop. G Troop, Bucky O'Neill, and those soldiers, and a unit of the 9th U.S. Cavalry followed me up Kettle Hill in a charge to take the high ground so that we would eliminate sniper fire and we could gain the advantage on the Spanish. Took 30% casualties. It was one of the most foolhardy charges in the world, but the men followed me because they knew I would take them to victory. They had confidence in me because they had confidence in myself. We reached the top of the hill and we bandaged our wounds, and the general staff looked in awe because we had not disobeyed orders, but we had carried out our orders beyond what they had given. So they thought we had done such a great job that we would go on across the valley and take the next hill, San Juan Heights. We mustered up some forces, and I gathered up additional units from the 9th Cavalry and from any unit that could carry a rifle. And we had another unit of the 10th Cavalry that actually had their horses do a flanking action, and we went across the valley and up the hill and took the high ground again, both high stations above Santiago, Cuba. The Rough Riders and the 9th U.S. Cavalry both were heroes in my eyes. The black soldiers served valiantly in that effort and proved themselves to be worthy to be called a man. And they were worthwhile looking at and serving with. We took the high ground, and 3 days later, the Spanish capitulated in Cuba, and we were welcomed home. And I was nominated for and awarded through Congress the Congressional Medal of Honor. It was never awarded directly to me. The Army Department had some umbrage with what I was saying about the way they were treating veterans and the way they were treating their hospitalization of those veterans. And so they held off the award until 1944, when my son, Theodore Jr., accepted the award posthumously for me. But I cared not about awards. I wanted to move on and serve. And when I was in a ticker tape parade with Commodore Dewey, The newspapers came up and interviewed and said, "You two are the most popular men in the country," because Dewey had been successful in Manila Harbor. And Dewey said, "I just want to return to the fleet." A humble man that is worthy of a hero status. And he did exactly that. They said I could have any political office in the country I wanted, and I spoke brashly as a young man that I was, and I said, "I would like to be governor of New York. That's my home state, and I feel that I can do the best work there." With the blessing of the Republican Party, cursedly so, they gave me the nomination, and I became governor of New York in 1898. I was happy with that job. My wife, Edith, was happy with the job. For the first time, I had a salary worth the work that I was doing. I had a home provided by the government. I had transportation costs and education for my children, and we lived quite well, and Edith was very happy with that. And so was I, and I was making a difference. We started a conservation program in New York State to protect waterways and make sure that there was clean drinking water, make sure the reservoirs would contain them and eliminate flooding and do irrigation where necessary. We started the conservation movement that I dearly loved in New York during that time. In doing so, I crossed swords with the Republican Party, and they were anxious to get rid of me. In 1900, Cabot Lodge, my good friend from Congress, came up and talked to me. He said, "The Republican Party is talking about running you for vice president. What do you think?" And I said, "I do not want that. That is a job that will get me into trouble." I said, "It's a job where you go off and are never heard from again." And he thought for a minute. He said, "That's exactly what they thought." They had a meeting in the back of the room, and they said, "What do we do with Theodore?" And somebody said, "Running for vice president, we'll never hear from him again." And I said, "I do not want that. I'm happy as governor. I'm making changes. I'm doing the work that I believe that my Lord and God has put me here to do." He said, "You may not have a choice, Theodore." A few weeks later, a delegation of 20 came up with the same request, and they told me, "You will not have that choice." Edith came into the conversation, and she explained, why would we want the vice presidency? We were comfortable as the governor. The vice president got paid half of what the governor did. He does not have lodging. He does not have a travel allowance, and he has to do his own expenses. Why would we want to go to New York City, Washington, D.C., and do that? And I said, "Edith, I do not want it. I will turn it down." I went on. I was giving a seconding speech for Mr. McKinley at the convention that fall. And I was preparing to do so, and a brash young man ran past me and took over the podium. And he said loudly to the crowd, "I nominate Theodore Roosevelt for Vice President of the United States. All those in favor say aye," and the room erupted with ayes. All those opposed say nay, and only mine was heard. That man, believe me, was not my hero. I was hoist on my own petard at that point. I could not turn them down, so I accepted. Mr. McKinley breathed a sigh of relief, and he confessed to me, and he said, "Theodore, I thought you were going to run against me." And I said, "You misunderstand my motives." And we called him Bill at the time, William McKinley. I said, "I do not want the presidency in 1900. I want to give you your second term. But I expect your nomination for president in 1904. That's when I want to be president." And he said, "You have it." Well, we ran the election. Mr. McKinley's idea was to sit on the porch in the White House and not do anything. And I said, "Do you mind if I travel the country and introduce myself?" And he said, "I don't think I could stop you." Well, I had a friend that owned the Kansas Pacific Railroad, and he gave me his private car, he gave me his dining car, he gave me cars for the press that I wanted to take with me, and my staff and my family to travel with me. And that election cycle in 1900, I traveled 17,000 miles in this country by rail. Wherever two people would stop at the end of the train, I would give a speech. Wherever I would stop and go into dinner, I would give a speech. I introduced the country to me and my policies and what I thought this country could be and how outstanding that we are who we are. For this country is not judged by who we are and what we have. This country is judged by what we do with who we are and what we have. And we need to do more in the world. We need to do more with our country. We need to do more for our citizens, and we need to make this country excel as we only can. Well, they followed the call, and Mr. McKinley was elected over bitter controversy. with William Jennings Bryan. I was in Colorado, as a matter of fact, and I found the ire of the Democratic Party up in Victor. I was staying here in Colorado Springs with my friend Phil Stewart, and we went up to Victor. I was invited up there by the Republican postmaster of Cripple Creek. I got a lukewarm welcome in Cripple Creek. I got a rather extravagant welcome in Goldfield. For 75 cents an egg and $1.25 a tomato they threw at my carriage. It was quite expensive. But I went on to Victor. And as I got off the train, my bodyguard and the quick-thinking postmaster, Stewart, got me back on the train. The miners have been stirred up by the Democrats and by the political machine. They had applied copious amounts of alcohol to the miners. They had been spreading lies about the gold to silver standard that we were running on. And the gold miners were upset. And they wanted to hang me. Literally, hang me. Or tar and feather me. They had the tar going. It was the postmaster that got me on horseback and down to the train and escaped. Meanwhile, on the way, one of the ruffians had a stick and he was ready to club me. And the postmaster took the stick away from him and threw it on the ground. Well, the politics of the time, the mayor of Victor's wrote me an apology and invited me back, thinking I would never take up that cross. I wrote him back in the next day and said, I would be glad to come back and speak to the fine townspeople of Victor. It is time we set the record straight. It took me a year, but 1901 I went back up. They had a brass band meeting me at the airport. They had at the train station. They had a full course of politicians there. They had a banquet that covered 3 blocks. And they had taken that club out of the ruffian's hands and capped it with a gold cap with an apology for the treatment I had. And I never had trouble with them again. That is my reception in the time. And I was vice president. I was relegated down to the dregs of history, I thought. September, I was in Colorado Springs. I was here in August for a reunion of the Rough Riders at the Antlers Hotel. And Philip Stewart and I went off to hunt in Montana, and we'd just come back on the 4th of September, and I was preparing on the 5th to take a train back to Oyster Bay. And I'd mounted the train, and we were off. And on September 6th, Mr. McKinley was shot in the Pan American Exposition. I was diverted in Chicago to go to Buffalo, but McKinley made a stronger recovery than was thought, and they told me I could go. And instead of going to Oyster Bay, I decided to go into the woods of the Adirondacks on a hike. September 13th, I received an urgent call. They sent a runner after me. I was some 40 miles up in the mountains. That Mr. McKinley was on death's door, and it was time for me to assume my proper role. We went headlong into the night, wasting 2 horses and a carriage to get me to a train station so I could go to Buffalo and take the oath of office. And I was sworn in as the President of the United States. That cowboy president, that, oh my God, that renegade is president, what are we to do? And the world has not been the same since. My heroes, my father and my mother had prepared me for that. The cowboys had prepared me for that. The Rough Riders had prepared me for that. And I took on the role of president. Throughout that presidency, I made changes. Because we cannot stand still and let this country vegetate. It is in a state of flux and creation every day. And it is up to us to take on that mantle. I created the Pure Food and Drug Act because they were peddling patent medicines that were 98% alcohol. They had tinctures of iodine and opium and other parts, and people were dying from medicines. We had cattle products in Chicago being slaughtered, wasting away in heated warehouses and being shipped as tainted meat across the country. The states were inadequate to control that. It was only the federal government that had the oversight that could control interstate commerce and control that aspect of human life. The Pure Food and Drug Act changed the way we did business in this country. The Antiquities Act of 1906 allowed me with a stroke of the pen to set aside large tracts of land for scientific, cultural, and benefit of all. Congress, in their omnipotent wisdom, always leaves unintended consequences to someone else to find. Well, this particular piece of legislation allowed me to declare anything of a cultural significance. The same thing in 1872 when Ulysses Simpson Grant signed in the Yellowstone Act, which was the National Parks Act. It was open-ended enough that I could make national parks and claim, and given the title of the father of the national park system. I deny that. It was what Ulysses Simpson Grant. What I did was make national monuments that 5 years later become national parks. And with another hero of mine, Gifford Pinchot, one of the most brilliant people in forestry history, in botany history. Gifford Pinchot was a hero because he put together an entire industry of forestry that would set aside large tracts of land, but still let us harvest the timber and take advantage of the natural resources we have. He taught me how to love the land more and how to tend it as a good shepherd would tend his flock. John Muir, along the same line. John Muir was older than I, so I'm 20 years older. He took me out to Yellowstone, or out to Yosemite, and out to the Owens Valley, and to the stands of the native old-growth redwood timbers that had recently been given to the Interior Department. He was intent on saving them for posterity and keeping them virtually untouched. We went on a camping trip, and we were out there, and I took him on a hike. Now, this man was 70 years old. We went on a hike and lasted 3 days. We lifted off the ground. We came back. I was invigorated. I was ready to do battle. And poor John Muir was sent to bed for 2 weeks. But he taught me about what we need to do and how we need to preserve it. Two great heroes in this country, and my personal hero. And we preserved Yellowstone through the Antiquities Act because Congress was not acting as they should. Bitter battles came over any subject that they were debating and trying to make laws for. It was time for action, and I was the man to take that action. Congress passed this law which allowed me to use executive privilege to protect this country and give you the heritage that you so richly deserve. I have boiled down my thoughts on this to wilderness warrior. I claim that title because this country was founded by wilderness warrior. My ancestors came here in 1625 on the Mayflower, 1644 on another boat. They settled in New England and New York and in the Carolinas. They came here not knowing what to expect, but they knew they would have to conquer a wilderness to live. And every time we make an advancement in this country, whether it is hopscotching across this continent, or whether it is taking another country, or whether it is exploring the depths of a lake or the top of a mountain, we are a wilderness warrior, and we have to take care of it when we trod on the land. Man is a supreme predator and must take care of his land. And that's what I tried to do. I left the control in 1908. That's why the flag is in front of you. When I left, there were 45 stars, 45 states. Utah, I was been corrected by the gentleman down here, was the last state to come on that flag. And I left the control to William Howard Taft, a good friend of mine. We took long walks together. We were kindred spirits in a lot of ways. And I cajoled him and told him he had to become president. I wish I had not done that now. He disappointed me bitterly. And he took all the progress that we had made in forestry, all the progress that we had made in pure food and drug, all the progress that we had made in negotiations between unions and management, and went back under the control of the party system. The final straw was in 1910. I'd just come back from Edward VII's funeral. I was the delegate to his funeral, and I had seen the conflict in Europe growing. I had been through Berlin, Paris, Rome, coming back from my African safari. And I'd seen the growing tensions in there, and I knew that there was going to be a war. I could see it written on the walls in invisible ink. I came back and tried to warn the country. But in 1910, in Oregon and Washington, Idaho, and Montana, was a dry winter. They were on the third year of a drought. The trees were drying up, and the forests were becoming tinderboxes. And in August of that year, they had 13 individual forest fires, and a dry wind came off the Pacific, which was unusual, and it fanned the flames into one gigantic fireball. And they called it the Big Burn for a good reason, because it moved so swiftly. In 3 days, it consumed 3 million acres of land of forest primeval. It consumed entire towns, it consumed railroads, trains that were going at breakneck speed full of people trying to escape the flames. The flames were moving so quickly it overtook those trains and blew them up. It was America's Pompeii because people were burned to death in their tracks. The fire was going that intense because he had taken the forestry service and denuded it of people and took the firefighting capabilities away from the country. The final straw with my ex-friend Taft was that. My hat was in the ring for the presidency in 12. I ran a spirited campaign, and I was in the lead by most polls. I had taken all but one caucus in the country, and I had completed every other, the new primary election system that was in place. I took enough delegates to the Republican convention to take a second ballot away from Mr. Taft. But my old arch enemies in the politics barred me at the door. They took the credentials away from my delegates and said they can attend, but they cannot vote. And I left and took half of the Republican Party with me. I was offered a seat on the ticket of the Progressive Party, and I said, I will gladly take that, but it will be my platform, not yours. I was ahead in the polls, and in October I went to Milwaukee to give a speech to 7,000 people. As I left my hotel room, I had my speech tucked in my pocket, my glasses case in my pocket, and I took down the stairs and went out on the street. And as a gentleman approached me and he raised his hands, I thought to shake my hand. He shot me with a .32 caliber gun through the worst place a politician could be shot. And no, it's not through the heart. Most of us don't have one. But through my speech, through my glasses case, and lodged between two ribs in my left breast. I put a stuffed handkerchief in to stop the bleeding. I turned the miserable person over to the constabulary, and my staff urged me to go to the hospital. I said, no, I have 7,000 people waiting to hear me. I will go and give a speech. And as I approached the dais, I approached it gingerly, and I rested upon it, and I apologized in a smaller voice than I normally have, that I would be quite more brief than I had ever been before, and I apologized for not giving them everything they came to hear. And I pulled the blood-soaked speech from my pocket and dropped it upon the ground. A gasp came over the audience and the silence, and I knew I had them. I gave them the essentials of what I wanted them to know and realize this country is great. This country can be greater if you apply yourselves as I apply myself. And I had them in the palm of my hand, and I gave them 45 minutes of unbroken talk. At that time, I had lost so much blood, I had to go to the hospital, and I was out of commission for 3 weeks. The rumor machine went rampant that I was drunken just like my brother was, that I was suffering from insanity. When the election happened, Mr. Wilson, who was not a hero of mine, I consider Mr. Wilson a socialist, a misogynist, and a segregationist. He was a socialist because he wanted to provide those services that man can provide for himself, and he wanted it at a price of freedom. He was a misogynist because he refused to identify with women's suffrage and the women's right in the workplace and the women's right in the role of this country. And he was a segregationist because he took the military, my proud 9th and 10th U.S. Cavalry, and put them in as horseshoers, truck drivers, and wagon drivers, and in the Navy put them as stokers and cabin boys. Took them out of combat, which they were primarily designed to do. And he accomplished this because he won by 10%. He had 40% of the vote, I had 30% of the vote, and poor Taft had 19%. I went on down to the River of Doubt because I was feeling pretty miserable myself. I would not let myself get into depression like this, but I went down and I suffered greatly on that trip. I did not plan it. I did not have any activity with it. And Colonel Rondon is not one of my heroes because he was a lousy planner. I jumped in the river to save a boat and I cut my leg and an infection set in. Another week later, we came down, both my son Kermit and I came down with malaria, both of which never left my body. That was in 1913. I started writing for the newspapers again, trying to stay active in the party, tried to run again in 16, but could not find a ticket that would take me. And I retired back to the wise old statesman that I never wanted to play. But my hero, my wife Edith, came in and told me to stay active, and she helped me. My heroes are people that help me. My heroes are my parents and my lineage. Be proud of where you come from, but remember one fact, that you are an American first, and your heritage comes second. I am an American of Dutch descent. I am not a Dutch American. The hyphenated American puts his nationality first and America second, and that is not to be tolerated. Those people that espouse Americanism and pride in their country, those are heroes to be respected. The people that come here from across the oceans, that risk death and dismemberment and disease and foul conditions to come to our shores to become citizens of the United States, those immigrants are to be respected and treasured, and they are heroes because they come to this country to become that unique person in the entire world, a citizen of the United States. We have but one flag, the American flag, the stars and stripes that you see before you, that we have fought and died for over the decades. We have but one language, the English language, by which the most challenging documents of freedom have been written. In the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve a relationship with another, or we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Two of the most perfectly tailored documents for freedom in the world. People are coming to our shores to share in that. And they're risking it all to be here, to become citizens. For it is through the process of education and naturalization that our citizens are created, and we are enriched for it. We are a melting pot. We are not a polyglot rooming house where people come to stay for a short period to take the wealth of this country only to return to their native lands, never adopting the customs, the language, or the citizenship that we so cherish. We are Americans that are unique in the entire world. We have freedoms that no one else has. We should cherish that. Cherish the challenge of living up to that tenet. And as I close my remarks tonight, my heroes are those people that take action. My father took action for me. My mother took action for me. Gifford Pinchot took action for me. John Muir took action. Colonel Leonard Wood, General Leonard Wood took action. Bucky O'Neill took action and became a friend. The cowboys guarded their heritage closely. They are all heroes to this country and to me. So I will leave you with the challenge that I gave and I have given to the people of the world. It is not to the naysayer, not to the man who tells a brave man how he could have done more, or a doer of deeds how he could have done more and yet better. It is not to the coward, the naysayer, that it belongs the day, but it is to the man who is actually in the arena, the man whose face is stained with blood and sweat and tears. It is to that man that belongs the day. For at best he will know the great exaltations of being spent in a worthy cause, and at worst only the bittersweet memory of failure. The naysayer, the coward, the one who tells somebody that he could do more, that man will know none of that, for he will not have attempted greatness at all, and he will die a cold and lonely death. We all should be that man in the arena and take our lives seriously and take the responsibility for it. And when you do that, other people see it and they will take responsibility, and this country will excel. Otherwise, we will become critics and die. Become that man in the arena and you will live a long and happy life. Become a hero to yourself, to your children, and you will live a long and happy life. And I hope that I have done so in mine. Thank you very much.